The evening rush at Le Petit Bistro was in full swing, with the clinking of fine china and the soft murmur of conversation filling the air. Among the bustling servers weaving between tables, one stood out, not for any obvious reason, but for the subtle grace in her movements that seemed almost choreographed, like a dancer trying to hide their training. Lai Min had mastered the art of becoming invisible when needed, appearing only at the perfect moment to refill a water glass or clear a plate. Her colleagues often wondered how she managed to move so effortlessly through the cramped spaces between tables, never bumping into anyone, never making a sound. What they didn't know was that years of piano training had taught her hands to be steady, her movements to be precise, and her timing to be impeccable. The restaurant's walls were adorned with vintage French posters and soft, warm lighting that cast a golden glow over the white tablecloths. In the corner stood a magnificent grand piano, covered in a velvet cloth, used only on weekend evenings when the restaurant hired local musicians. Lai Min felt its presence like a constant ache in her chest, a reminder of the life she'd put on hold. 10 years of training at one of the world's most prestigious music schools now served only to help her balance plates and remember complex orders without writing them down. Her fellow servers joked that she had a photographic memory, but it was really just the same discipline that had once helped her memorize entire concertos. Table 7 needs their check, and 12 just got seated, called out Ray, the floor manager, as he passed by with a stack of menus. Lai Min nodded, already mentally reorganizing her next few minutes. She'd learned to break down her shifts into movements, like a symphony. Each table its own melody, weaving together into a complex arrangement of timing and precision. A group of business executives sat at table 12, their suits probably worth more than her monthly rent. She approached with a practiced smile, the kind that reached her eyes just enough to seem genuine, but not so much as to seem eager. As she listened to their drink orders, her mind wandered briefly to the stack of bills waiting at home and the letter from her younger brother's college about upcoming tuition payments. The grand piano caught the corner of her eye again as she headed to the bar to put in the drink orders. She remembered the way her mother's face had fallen when she'd announced she was taking this job. All those years of practice, all that talent. But what choice did she have? Dreams didn't pay medical bills or help put siblings through school. Between taking orders and delivering plates of expertly prepared French cuisine, she sometimes caught fragments of the soft background music playing through the restaurant's speakers. Her fingers would twitch slightly, muscle memory trying to play along with Chopin's Nocturnes or Debussy's Clair de Lune. Some of the regular customers had started to notice this small tick, this tiny betrayal of her carefully maintained server's persona. The weight of the plates she carried felt nothing like the weight of the dreams she'd set aside. Yet there was dignity in this work too, she reminded herself. There was artistry in making people feel cared for, in orchestrating their evening so smoothly they barely noticed the effort behind it. Still, every time she walked past that piano, every time she heard music floating through the restaurant's carefully curated playlist, she felt the pull of what could have been. As the evening wore on, she moved through her routine with practiced efficiency. Take orders, deliver food, check on tables, process payments. Each interaction was a small performance, each smile a tiny mask. Yet beneath it all, her heart beat to a different rhythm, one that matched the tempo of the classical pieces she still played in her dreams. It started like any other Friday evening at Le Petit Bistro. The restaurant was packed, with a waiting list stretching into the next hour. The kitchen hummed with activity, and servers darted between tables like well-choreographed dancers. Lai Min had been on her feet for 6 hours straight, but she moved with the same careful precision she always maintained. The evening took its fatal turn when Mr. Wong, the city's most influential food critic, walked in with a group of 5 other people. Everyone knew who he was. His reviews could make or break a restaurant, and his latest online food blog had over 1 million followers. The owner himself came out to greet them, and Ray, the floor manager, assigned their table to Lai Min, trusting her usual flawless service. The group ordered several bottles of the restaurant's finest red wine, a vintage Bordeaux that cost more than Lai Min's weekly salary. She carefully arranged the bottles on her serving tray, along with their crystal wine glasses, creating a perfect balance just as she'd done hundreds of times before. Everything happened in slow motion. A young child, running from their parents, darted between the tables. Lai Min tried to step back, but another server carrying dirty dishes was right behind her. In that split second, she had to choose between colliding with the child or the other server. Her instincts made her twist away from the child, but the movement sent the tray off balance. The crash seemed to silence the entire restaurant. The deep red wine spread across Mr. Wong's crisp white shirt and designer suit like a slowly blooming flower. Crystal glasses shattered on the hardwood floor, their tinkling sound somehow worse than a scream. Drops of wine splattered onto the other guests, staining dresses and suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Someone at a nearby table was already recording with their phone. Lai Min could see their reflection in the decorative mirror on the wall, her own face frozen in horror. Mr. Wong standing with his arms held out in shock, the wine dripping from his sleeves. She knew this would be on social media within minutes. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" Mr. Wong's voice wasn't particularly loud, but it carried across the now silent restaurant. The owner rushed over, profusely apologizing, offering to pay for dry cleaning, promising complimentary meals. But the damage was done. Other diners were whispering, some barely hiding their phones as they captured the aftermath. Lai Min tried to help clean up, her hands shaking as she picked up broken glass. "Just go to the back," Ray whispered, touching her shoulder gently. "I'll handle this." She walked to the kitchen, feeling the stares of every customer burning into her back. By midnight, the video had gone viral. "Clumsy server ruins food critics' night" was trending locally on social media. The comments were merciless. People joking about her coordination, making memes out of the moment the wine splashed, speculating about how much the ruined clothes cost. Someone had even set the video to classical music, making it worse somehow. The owner called her into his office the next day. He didn't fire her. Good servers were hard to find, and she had an otherwise perfect record. But his disappointment was clear. "You'll be working lunch shifts for a while," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Until this blows over." The lunch shifts meant fewer hours, fewer tips, and more financial stress. Over the next few weeks, Lai Min noticed the changes. Regular customers who used to request her section now asked to be seated elsewhere. Some would point and whisper when she passed. The viral video had become a local joke, with people coming in just to see the wine girl. Every time someone new recognized her, she felt the shame all over again. She started wearing her hair differently, hoping to be less recognizable. She took the long way around tables to avoid passing near anyone with expensive clothes. Her graceful movements became cautious, hesitant. The confidence she'd built over years of service drained away, replaced by a constant anxiety that made even the simplest tasks feel dangerous. At home, she stopped playing the piano recordings she usually listened to while cooking. The music reminded her too much of the classical soundtrack someone had added to her viral moment of shame. Instead, she worked in silence, trying to figure out how many extra shifts she would need to make up for the lost income from her reduced hours. 3 weeks after the wine incident, Lai Min volunteered to close the restaurant. The other servers were surprised. Nobody wanted the closing shift, which meant staying until almost midnight cleaning up after the last customers. But lately, she preferred working when fewer people were around to recognize her. The night had been slow due to heavy rain, and by 10:30, the last customers were already gone. She moved through her closing duties like a ghost, wiping down tables in the dim light, straightening chairs, and rolling silverware for the next day. The quiet was soothing after weeks of whispers and stares. Thunder rumbled outside as she worked, and the rain tapped against the windows like gentle fingers on piano keys. The thought made her pause, her cleaning cloth hovering above the table. Her eyes drifted to the grand piano in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the soft emergency lights. Usually, the piano was locked, a beautiful antique Steinway that the weekend performers used. But tonight, something was different. The cleaning crew had moved it slightly to vacuum underneath, and in doing so, had apparently forgotten to secure the cover. It sat there, slightly ajar, like an unspoken invitation. Lai Min glanced at the kitchen doors. The last cook had left 30 minutes ago. Ray, the floor manager, was in the office counting the day's receipts, his attention fully absorbed in spreadsheets and receipts. The security cameras didn't cover the corner where the piano sat. Her feet moved without conscious thought. Standing beside the instrument, she could smell the familiar polish, the aged wood. With trembling fingers, she lifted the cover fully, wincing at the slight creak. The keys gleamed up at her, black and white soldiers standing at attention, waiting for commands. She sat on the bench, adjusting it out of habit, muscle memory from thousands of practice sessions. The leather was cool against her legs. Her hands hovered over the keys, shaking slightly. How long had it been? 6 months? A year? The first note was barely a whisper. Middle C, the beginning of everything. The sound hung in the air like a question. Another note followed, then another. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget, finding the melody of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 as if it had been waiting there all along. The music started softly, building slowly like the storm outside. Her fingers gained confidence with each measure, weaving the complex emotions of the piece into the quiet restaurant. The powerful chords echoed her frustration. The delicate runs reflected her lingering grace. The dramatic swells matched the thunder. She closed her eyes, swaying slightly as the music took over. In that moment, she wasn't the server who had spilled wine on a famous critic. She wasn't the subject of viral videos or whispered jokes. She was just a musician, speaking through 88 keys, telling her story without words. Time disappeared. The restaurant faded away. There was only the music, flowing through her like electricity, each note washing away a little more of the shame and anxiety she'd been carrying. Her body moved with the music, years of training emerging from beneath the careful facade she'd built. The piece grew more intense, her fingers flying across the keys with renewed confidence. The piano responded to her touch like an old friend, offering comfort and strength through each phrase. The sound filled the empty restaurant, bouncing off the walls, seeping into every corner. This was who she really was, not the careful server, not the viral video joke, but this person who could make an instrument sing, who could turn notes on a page into pure emotion. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't stop playing. Couldn't stop playing. The music had become a lifeline, pulling her back to herself. Thunder crashed outside, perfectly timed with a dramatic chord progression, and she smiled through her tears. Even nature seemed to be playing along, providing accompaniment to her private concert. The rain's rhythm matched her tempo, the wind's whistle harmonized with her melody. In that moment, surrounded by music and storm, she felt truly free for the first time in weeks. The weight of recent events lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the familiar comfort of being one with the instrument. She was home, even if just for this stolen moment in an empty restaurant. Down in the wine cellar, a small group had gathered for a private tasting. The owner was entertaining some longtime customers, sharing vintages and stories in the cozy space beneath the main dining room. They were discussing a particular Bordeaux when the first notes of the piano drifted down through the ceiling. At first, they'd barely noticed it, the sound mixing with their conversation. But as the music grew stronger, their words gradually faded. The owner paused mid-sentence, wine bottle frozen in mid-pour. One of the guests, a concert pianist himself, tilted his head in surprise. "That's Rachmaninoff," he whispered, almost afraid to break the spell. "And it's extraordinary." The small group exchanged glances. The owner frowned. He hadn't scheduled any performers for tonight. The weekend pianist had called in sick, and besides, it was nearly midnight. Who could be playing? They moved quietly up the cellar stairs, drawn by the music like moths to a flame. The owner reached for the door handle, then hesitated. The performance was so beautiful, so passionate, he was almost afraid to interrupt it. When they finally opened the door, the sight before them stopped them in their tracks. There, at the grand piano, sat their quiet lunch server, the same one who'd been relegated to early shifts after the wine incident. But she was transformed. Gone was the hesitant, shame-faced woman they'd seen these past weeks. In her place was an artist, lost in her craft, creating magic with each touch of the keys. Her eyes were closed, tears streaming down her face as she played. She swayed with the music, her whole body part of the performance. Her fingers moved across the keys with stunning precision and grace, drawing sounds from the old Steinway that it hadn't produced in years. The owner started to step forward, perhaps to stop her, but the concert pianist caught his arm. "Don't," he mouthed silently. "Please." The others nodded in agreement, and they stood in the shadows, witnessing something that felt almost sacred. More people appeared from different corners of the restaurant. Ray emerged from the office, paperwork forgotten in his hands. Two kitchen staff who had been finishing inventory peeked through the door. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They'd barely breathed. The storm outside provided a perfect backdrop to the performance, thunder accenting dramatic moments, rain providing a gentle percussion. Through it all, Lai Min remained lost in her world of music, unaware of her growing audience. The concert pianist's eyes were wide with professional appreciation. He noticed how her technique was flawless, her timing impeccable. This wasn't just someone who could play. This was someone who had trained at the highest levels. His mind raced with questions. Why was she here? How had they not known? One of the regular customers, an elderly woman who had been particularly cold to Lai Min since the wine incident, pressed a tissue to her eyes. The music spoke of such deep emotion, longing, loss, hope, and resilience, that it was impossible not to be moved. The owner's face underwent a series of transformations as he listened: surprise, confusion, embarrassment, and finally, something like wonder. He remembered how harshly he'd judged her after the accident, how quickly he'd accepted the social media narrative of the clumsy server. Now, watching her command this complex piece with such mastery, he felt ashamed of his own quick judgment. As the piece reached its climax, the hidden audience remained spellbound. The final notes resonated through the restaurant, powerful and perfect. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the continuing rainfall outside. Then Lai Min opened her eyes and the spell broke. She saw them all standing there, the owner, the staff, the customers, and her face went pale. Her hands flew off the keys as if they'd turned to fire. She stood quickly, nearly knocking over the piano bench. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I shouldn't have. The piano was open, and I—" But before she could finish her apology, before she could retreat into shame once again, something unexpected happened. The concert pianist began to clap. The others joined in, the sound growing until it filled the restaurant as completely as the music had moments before. The next morning, Lai Min arrived at work expecting to be fired. Instead, she found herself sitting in the owner's office, hands folded nervously in her lap, while he paced behind his desk. The morning sun streamed through the windows, making the dust motes dance in the air between them. "Why didn't you tell us?" he finally asked, stopping to look at her. His voice wasn't angry, just genuinely puzzled. "All this time, you had this incredible talent." Lai Min stared at her hands. "It didn't seem relevant to serving tables," she said softly. "And after the accident with the wine, I didn't think anyone would want to know." The owner sat down, leaning forward. "The concert pianist from last night. He's been coming here for 15 years. He says your technique is world class. He asked where you studied." Juilliard, she whispered, the word feeling strange on her tongue after so long. But that was before my father got sick. Before the medical bills. Understanding dawned on the owner's face. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The wall clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside the office, they could hear the morning prep crew getting ready for lunch service. I have a proposition for you, he said finally. Something that might benefit us both. He gestured to a stack of papers on his desk, printouts of social media posts. That wine incident video is still making rounds. But last night, someone recorded part of your performance on their phone. It's already getting shares. Lai Min felt her cheeks grow hot, but the owner held up his hand. No, this is good. People are asking questions. They're interested. The clumsy server who turns out to be a piano virtuoso. It's a story people want to hear. He stood up again, moving to the window. Here's what I'm thinking. You keep your regular shifts during our busiest hours, we need good servers, and you're still one of our best. But 3 nights a week, you also perform for our dinner crowd. We'll pay you extra for the performances, of course. Lai Min's heart skipped a beat. But what about the weekend pianist? He's been looking to cut back anyway. And honestly, the owner turned to face her. What I heard last night was something special. The kind of music that could make this place more than just another French restaurant. He walked over to a filing cabinet, pulled out some papers. We'll draw up a proper contract. You'll be both server and performer. It's unusual, I know, but he smiled slightly. After last night, I think unusual might be exactly what this place needs. The proposition hung in the air between them. Lai Min's mind raced. The extra income would help with her brother's tuition. More importantly, she could play again. Really play, not just stolen moments in an empty restaurant. There's one condition, the owner added, sitting back down. The first performance needs to be special. I want to invite back some people, including Mr. Wong. Lai Min felt her stomach tighten at the mention of the food critic's name. The owner must have seen her expression because he quickly continued. Trust me on this. The wine incident was unfortunate, but this. He gestured to a phone on his desk, where her performance video was paused. This is redemption. This is a story people will love. The question is, are you ready to tell it? The morning sun had climbed higher, filling the office with warm light. Through the door, Lai Min could hear the familiar sounds of the restaurant coming to life. Cups clinking, voices calling out morning greetings, the coffee machine humming. But now, mixed with these familiar sounds, she could almost hear music, possibilities, opportunities, chances she thought she'd lost forever. She thought about her father, who had always told her that life's greatest moments often come disguised as its biggest mistakes. She thought about all the nights she dreamed of playing again, all the times she'd walked past that piano wondering what if. Looking at the owner, she sat up straighter. Her voice was quiet but firm when she finally spoke. When would you like me to start? The smile that spread across the owner's face was warm and genuine. How about we make it this Friday? I know some people who would love to hear Rachmaninoff played properly in this restaurant again. For the first time in weeks, Lai Min felt herself truly smile. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages, even, perhaps, in a spilled glass of wine. The restaurant had changed in subtle ways over the past month. New lighting had been installed near the piano, and the tables had been rearranged to create better sightlines. But the biggest change was in the atmosphere, especially on the nights when Lai Min performed. She would start her evenings as always, taking orders and serving dishes with her usual grace. Customers who didn't know her story would sometimes do a double take when she set down their plates and then walked to the piano, exchanging her server's apron for an elegant shawl she kept hung nearby. The first few times she played, her hands shook slightly. But the music would take over, just as it had that stormy night, and everything else would fade away. She chose her pieces carefully. Chopin's nocturnes during the early dinner hours, more dramatic pieces as the evening progressed, and always taking requests from regular customers who had quickly learned their favorites. Word spread through the city's food and entertainment circles. The restaurant's social media presence had transformed from that embarrassing wine-spilling video to clips of her performances. People started making reservations specifically for nights when she played. Some would request to be seated at her tables, wanting to be served by the same hands that could make the piano sing. One evening, a young girl tugged at her sleeve between songs. "My mom says you used to just be a server," the child said, eyes wide with wonder. "How did you learn to play like that?" Lai Min knelt down to the girl's level. "I was never just a server," she said gently. "Sometimes we carry our dreams in different ways until it's their time to shine." The girl's mother, watching nearby, wiped away a tear. The other servers had changed their attitude toward her as well. Where once there had been whispers about the wine incident, now they asked her about music. Some would linger after their shifts to listen to her play. The kitchen staff would time their breaks to catch certain pieces they'd grown fond of. Regular customers began bringing her sheet music, requesting special songs for anniversaries or birthdays. An elderly couple celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary at the restaurant, asking her to play the same piece that had played at their wedding. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The owner had been right. Her story resonated with people. Local blogs picked it up, writing about the hidden virtuoso of Le Petit Bistro. A local news station did a small feature about her, interviewing customers about the unique experience of being served by a world-class pianist. "It reminds you not to judge people," one customer said in the interview. "Everyone has a story. Everyone has hidden talents. Sometimes life just takes unexpected turns." Between serving and performing, Lai Min's earnings had doubled. She could finally help her brother with his college expenses without struggling to make her own rent. She started giving piano lessons on Monday mornings when the restaurant was closed, using the grand piano that had once been forbidden to her. But the most meaningful changes were the smallest ones. The way she held herself taller, shoulders no longer hunched with shame. The genuine smile that replaced her careful server's mask. The joy that returned to her eyes when she talked about music. One busy Saturday night, she overheard a customer say something that stuck with her. "You know what makes her playing so special?" the woman asked her companion. "It's like she knows what it means to lose something and find it again. You can hear it in every note." That night, after closing, Lai Min sat at the piano in the empty restaurant. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys that had become familiar friends again. The same rain that had accompanied her secret performance months ago tapped gently at the windows, but this time she wasn't hiding. She thought about how life could change so completely. How a moment of humiliation had led to this beautiful second chance. How sometimes our worst mistakes can guide us back to our truest selves. A small notebook beside the piano was filled with customer requests for next week's performances. Her server's apron hung neatly beside her performance shawl. Both were equally hers now, equally important parts of who she had become. She began to play softly, not practicing for anything in particular, just letting the music flow. In the quiet restaurant, the melody spoke of transformation, of dreams reborn, and of the unexpected ways life sometimes leads us home. The night of Le Petit Bistro's 25th anniversary celebration arrived with a sense of occasion in the air. The restaurant had been closed all day for preparations. Fresh flowers adorned every table, their sweet scent mixing with the aroma of herbs from the kitchen. Tiny lights had been strung across the ceiling, creating the illusion of stars indoors. Lai Min arrived early, carrying a garment bag with her performance dress. As she walked through the quiet restaurant, she remembered that stormy night 6 months ago, when she'd first touched the piano keys. How different everything was now. The guest list for the evening read like a who's who of the city's food scene. Food critics, restaurateurs, loyal customers who'd been coming for decades. All would be there. And at one special table, her father in his wheelchair, finally well enough to travel, along with her brother, taking a break from his college studies to be there for his sister's big night. Most importantly, Mr. Wong would be there. The food critic, whose wine-stained suit had once been her greatest shame, had requested to be seated near the piano. The owner had shown her his latest blog post that morning, a preview of the evening that mentioned how eager he was to hear the full performance of the pianist he'd once known only as the server with the slippery tray. As guests began to arrive, Lai Min moved between tables with her usual grace, but now there was no need to hide who she was. Customers greeted her by name, asked what she would be playing later, shared their excitement about being there for the special night. The owner clinked his glass for attention as the main course was being cleared. The restaurant fell silent as he spoke about the restaurant's history, about tradition and change, about how sometimes the most beautiful moments come from unexpected places. Then he turned to introduce Lai Min. She walked to the piano, her simple black dress catching the light. The same elderly couple who'd celebrated their anniversary at the restaurant months ago smiled encouragingly from their table. The concert pianist who'd first recognized her talent nodded in appreciation. Her father's eyes shone with tears of pride. He had always believed in her talent, even when circumstances had forced her to set it aside. Her brother gave her a thumbs up, reminding her of all the times he'd listened to her practice at home years ago. As she sat at the piano, Lai Min caught Mr. Wong's eye. He smiled and raised his water glass slightly. No wine tonight, she noticed with a small smile of her own. The moment of tension broke, replaced by understanding between two people who had learned that life's most embarrassing moments can sometimes lead to its greatest victories. She began to play. Not Rachmaninoff this time, but a piece she had composed herself, weaving together classical training with the stories of the past 6 months. The melody spoke of falling and rising, of shame turned to triumph, of dreams deferred but not forgotten. The music filled the restaurant, touching every corner just as it had that first night. But now there was no need to hide, no need to keep her talent in the shadows. Each note carried the weight of her journey, from the crash of falling wine glasses to the gentle appreciation of customers who had become friends. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then applause erupted, filling the room with as much warmth as her music had. The owner wiped his eyes discreetly. Her father beamed with pride. Even the kitchen staff had come out to listen, standing in the doorway with their white coats still dusted with flour. Mr. Wong stood up, still applauding. Others followed suit until the whole restaurant was on its feet. Lai Min stood and bowed, her heart full of gratitude for this moment, for these people, for the strange and wonderful path that had led her here. Later that night, after the last guests had left and the cleanup was done, Lai Min sat alone at the piano one more time. Her server's apron hung next to her on the bench. No longer a symbol of dreams deferred, but a reminder that sometimes life's most beautiful songs need both harmony and discord to be complete. She played a few quiet notes, smiling at how the keys felt like old friends now. On the table beside her lay the evening's newspaper, folded open to Mr. Wong's latest review. The headline read, "Le Petit Bistro celebrates 25 years, where music and second chances create magic." Outside, the city lights twinkled like the tiny bulbs strung across the restaurant's ceiling. Another busy day waited tomorrow, with its mixture of serving tables and filling the air with music. But now, in this quiet moment, Lai Min simply sat and let her fingers rest on the keys, grateful for spilled wine, viral videos, and all the unexpected ways life sometimes leads us exactly where we need to be.